An adequate and up-to-date supply of emergency response and recovery materials and appropriate equipment can mean the difference between minimal or no damage to the institution and complete disaster. Okay. Wait a minute here. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. As with all other aspects of emergency planning, it is important to identify and gather the necessary supplies and equipment long before an emergency is imminent, or worse, after it happens. The first step is to figure out what you need. Based on the particular threats identified in your institution's risk assessment, identify which emergency supplies and equipment you will need. For example, if the institution is located in a floodplain, clothing such as rubber boots and raincoats, as well as plastic sheeting, sandbags, pumping devices, mops, buckets, squeegees, fans, and dehumidifiers should be kept on hand. For fires, keep an adequate number of fire extinguishers on hand and store buckets, shovels, rakes, and hose. Determine what quantities you will need. How much plastic sheeting will you need to adequately cover all of your collection shelving racks? Will 2 ladders or 4 hammers be enough during an emergency? Identify sources for expensive equipment that you may not be able to buy, such as generators and refrigerated trucks, and make arrangements well in advance for payment and delivery. You may be able to borrow emergency equipment from local emergency authorities, things like barricades, tarps, tents, drying or pumping equipment, and auxiliary lighting. Remember, however, that you will be on your own in a big event that affects the entire area. Identify nearby sources for the replacement of damaged or inaccessible material previously assembled. Create a shopping list and make sure that several staff members keep a copy of the list off-site. There are many emergency preparedness resources available to help you determine what you might need. The reference that we are using for this Connecting to Collections initiative, Getty's Building an Emergency Plan, has several comprehensive lists of emergency supplies and equipment. For example, Appendix E provides a list of supplies and equipment needed for a first aid box, an emergency response cart, and a disaster supply box. Steal This Handbook, a publication by the Southeastern Registrars Association, is another good reference. Several of the websites that we have mentioned in previous workshops, such as the Northeast Documents Conservation Center and FEMA, have good supply and equipment lists. A basic supply equipment list includes the following: hand carts, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, polyethylene bags, sponges, absorbent towels, buckets, mops, brooms, wet-dry vacuums, fire extinguishers, flashlights, battery-operated radios, cameras, extra batteries, crowbars, shovels, lumber, first aid supplies, protective clothing like gloves, disposable masks, disposable coveralls, boots, and hard hats, food supplies, enough for several days, potable water, 3 days supply at 1 gallon per person per day, and paper goods like toilet paper, enough for several days. Once you have identified the kinds of supplies and types of equipment you need, determine what the institution already has on hand. Create an inventory of what is already available. Then decide what you need to purchase. Expendable supplies like plastic sheeting and absorbent towels should be designated specifically for emergency response and recovery. If you have these supplies on hand already, but you need to use them for non-emergency related activities, go out and buy another set for emergency use only. Of course, your institution does not have to have multiple sets of equipment like wet-dry vacuums, chainsaws, ladders, and hand tools. However, these items must be kept in readiness at all times. That is, they have to be inventoried, inspected, and maintained on a regular basis, that is monthly, quarterly, or annually. It is also important to include copies of operating manuals and instructions for any special equipment like communication devices such as walkie-talkies or radios, or power equipment such as chainsaws. Better yet, include annual training in the use of such devices, especially fire extinguishers. For dangerous equipment like chainsaws, designate exactly which staff members have the authorization to operate such machinery. Volunteers should not be allowed to operate such equipment without first signing a waiver. Large quantities of expensive items like a generator or perishable materials like food and water need not be stockpiled. Instead, identify suppliers and make arrangements for emergency delivery as needed. A commercially prepared emergency supply box called a React Pack is available from several different archival supply companies, Gaylord, Hollinger Metal Edge, and University Products. The polypropylene box in which the React Pack contents are stored is called a rest cube. The rest cube is also sold separately without the React Pack contents. The React Pack comes prepackaged with a number of useful emergency supplies, including personal protective gear, cleanup equipment like a mop, paper towels and sponges, plastic sheeting, adhesive tape, caution tape, flashlight and batteries, trash bags, ties, a clipboard, paper, index cards, pencils, and a China marker. The pros to a prepackaged supply box are its convenience, ready accessibility, and ease of use. Everything comes in one box. The box is already labeled as an emergency supply box. It is easily stored. The supplies are well protected within the plastic rest cube. The cons are the high cost and the limited amount of certain supplies. Each React Pack ranges from $228 to $255 before tax and shipping and handling. Smaller institutions may not be able to afford even one React Pack. One React Pack may not be enough. The amount of certain supplies contained in one cube may not be adequate. For example, the React Pack includes only 2 pre-cut plastic sheets of 3 feet by 12 feet and 2 pre-cut plastic sheets of 3 by 18 feet. This would not even begin to cover the shelving units in even the smallest collection storage room at the Florida Museum of Natural History. This means that we would have to purchase additional supplies or multiple React Packs. The amount of needed emergency supplies and equipment may be purchased more cheaply than buying multiple React Packs. Most of the supplies in the React Pack can be purchased more cheaply if bought separately. Some, like the plastic sheeting, can be purchased in bulk for discounted prices, then shared by several divisions or departments within a larger institution or by several smaller institutions within the same local area. Establish designated locations to store your emergency supplies and equipment. These areas can be anything from a couple of shelves on a storage rack, a couple of shelves or drawers in a cabinet, or a corner of a storage room or closet. Label the supplies clearly and mark the locations with highly visible signage. The Florida Museum of Natural History uses indelible markers to mark the supply containers and brightly colored papered signs to indicate supply and equipment locations. The Seattle Museum keeps supplies in large crates painted bright yellow to visually orient staff to the supply caches. Choose the locations carefully. The supplies and equipment need to be easily and quickly accessible. It is also important to provide sufficient protection for supplies and equipment so that they will be available and undamaged in the event of a disaster. For example, storing absorbent towels and other dry goods in cardboard boxes in a flimsy metal storage shed when your institution is susceptible to hurricanes or flooding is not a very good idea. In this instance, chances are great that the shed, the boxes, and/or the supplies will be damaged or destroyed during the disaster. It is so important to make sure that all staff, including volunteers, know exactly where emergency supply caches and equipment are located and who has access to them, including who keeps the keys to the cabinet, closet, or storeroom. Post maps that alert staff members as to where they can find emergency supplies and equipment, such as designated cleaning supplies, fire extinguishers, and keys to emergency supply equipment storage areas. There is nothing worse than not knowing where the wet dry vacuum is stored or not being able to get to it when water is cascading down the front of a collection storage unit. It is essential to inventory caches of emergency supplies and inspect emergency equipment on a regular basis. It does you no good to have identified and gathered these items if they have disappeared or are non-functional when you need them. Using a pre-emergency prepared checklist, inventory the supplies, replace any that are missing, and replenish any that are depleted. Repair or replace any broken or missing tools and machinery. Check to see if any equipment needs batteries or chargers. Are the batteries installed? Do you have extra batteries? How old are they? What is the source of power for battery chargers? Some emergency chargers are now solar powered. For example, the Econ emergency radio has a solar powered cell phone jack. Establish a regular schedule, either monthly, quarterly, or annually, and stick to it. A good time to check emergency supplies and equipment is during the annual review of your emergency preparedness plan or before drills. At the same time, verify that outside experts and/or resource information is up to date. Designate one person, such as a member of the Health and Safety Committee, or a team of people, such as a member from each of the institution's divisions or departments, to be responsible for the regular inventories and inspection of emergency supplies and equipment. At the Florida Museum of Natural History, our facilities manager tests our battery-operated emergency lights monthly. Our fire extinguishers are inspected monthly by staff from the university's Department of Environmental Health and Safety. Replace batteries in emergency equipment such as flashlights and radios on a regular schedule. Using the same schedule that we use to replace the batteries in our smoke alarms, that is, the dates of the fall and spring time changes, will help make it easy for you to remember. Make sure to replenish supplies and clean or repair equipment as soon as possible after a drill or actual recovery operation. The institution's annual budget should include line items for purchase, maintenance, or replacement of emergency supplies and equipment. At the Mystic Seaport Museum, each department is responsible for including these costs in their annual department budget. At the Florida Museum of Natural History, the Director's Office budgets annually for these expenses with input from the museum's Health and Safety Committee. Unless an emergency situation occurs to deplete supplies, maintenance costs should be minimal. Establish a credit line with vendors ahead of time to be used in the event of an emergency. Places like hardware stores, office supply stores, and disaster recovery firms, so that supplies can be procured and services obtained even if there is no way to pay for them up front. Remember, debit and credit cards cannot be processed in the event of a power outage. The institution may have to fundraise to meet certain emergency supplies and equipment needs. This could be one of the Board of Trustees' responsibilities to oversee. Institutional and community members may be willing to donate funds for such expenses. They would rather give for emergency preparedness than wait to hear from us when we are totally devastated and needing tens of thousands of dollars. Do not be afraid to solicit donations from local businesses and corporations. They may be willing to donate goods or arrange for post-disaster recovery services. Drugstores and grocery stores may be willing to help stock emergency supply storage containers. Office supply stores may donate heavy-duty boxes for moving the collection. A lumber company may supply and cut wood for protective shutters. Some institutional insurance policies may cover the purchase or rental of emergency response and recovery supplies and equipment, like portable generators, temporary relocation costs, and cleanup services. The policy should cover drying, cleaning, and reconditioning of equipment and collections objects. Keep copies of the insurance claim and policy with emergency supplies on site and with copies of other important documents off-site. Make sure that someone on staff other than the director or finance manager has access to cash and credit in the event of an emergency. A real emergency for the Seattle Art Museum revealed a financial oversight in its emergency preparedness plan. The downtown Seattle area experienced a major power outage, which could have placed sensitive museum objects in jeopardy. Diesel was low in the emergency generator, and the museum was in danger of running out of fuel. Staff had to arrange an emergency delivery of fuel early on a Saturday morning. They realized that they did not have access to cash or to a company credit card to pay for it. The senior deputy director used her own credit card to pay for the fuel. The museum has since made arrangements with the diesel company, and it will accept museum charges on a company credit card. Also, the senior deputy director now has the authorization to actually use the museum's credit card. In addition, the museum now has the emergency generator refueled immediately following routine testing. These are just a few details to think about concerning emergency response and recovery supplies and equipment. With that, I'll entertain any questions.
Elise, this is Miriam, and I think a question that a lot of, particularly the smaller institutions might have is, how do you decide on priorities of what to purchase? Because it's clear that that's a long list of supplies. It's clear that I would need them all, but how do I think through about where I start with my shopping list if I really am trying to create a shopping list from scratch?
I think the first place you start, after you've figured out what you want based on the type of emergencies you might experience, is to you create the list, and then you figure out, either from your collections plan or your strategic plan, what are the priorities in your institution. So if the protection of a particular collection is the top priority, then you might buy the supplies necessary to protect that collection. And if you don't have enough money to buy everything on the list, find out where you can beg, borrow, and steal from. See what you can get donated. You're a member of the museum may be willing to donate a large roll of plastic sheeting. But I think prioritizing starts with the priorities of your institution.
So that's really another reminder of that incredibly important process of determining priority objects, because that's when the argument, I think if I'm hearing you right, that's when the argument, you're not simply trying to say, I want to protect collections. You're saying we have the most significant set of photographs from the 1880s in our community, or we have the last of we have some okapi in our collections and there's only a few left in the world, or you're being very specific is what I'm hearing you say, rather than this just general, I need brooms and mops in case there's a problem. And I think that that's a really helpful way to think about it.
That's right, Miriam, I agree. And that's also an easy way to fundraise for the supplies. Rather than just being generic and saying I need emergency supplies, you can go to a donor, hardware store and say I need this because I have this collection. Anne had a question.
My question was, do you ever use any of your emergency supplies, specifically like the large tools or equipment, in training exercises?
You can, and we do. I think the thing to think about there is if it's something that's really expensive and it's going to mean using it up or using a good quantity of it, you might have to pretend or fake it. Use something else instead of the plastic sheeting. If you have a piece of cloth or something, or just pretend to go through the exercise. You're physically putting the plastic up without actually holding the plastic.
We would like to know in Tallahassee if there are any grants available for acquiring emergency supplies.
You know, that's a good question. I am not really sure. Robin may know more about that. She's pretty good with things like that, Robin Kilgore.
Sorry, could you all repeat the question real quick?
Yes, I'm sorry, I should do that. It was a question about grants. Are there any grants out there for procuring emergency supplies?
That is a really good question. To be honest, I'd probably have to do a little research into that. Specifically for supplies, the big companies would be like Heritage Preservation, or any of those groups might have something specifically towards disaster relief. But that's something I'll put on my list and do a little research about, and probably post something on the online forums for. We also had a quick question down here in South Florida. If for some reason the collection storage area would be difficult to secure to put supplies in, would you recommend having supplies at an off-site location or somewhere that could be secured so that other staff couldn't pilfer your supplies, so to speak?
That's a great question, because that is such a common problem. The supplies disappear, and sometimes you can't track down who's done it. But some of the people do say to store supplies off-site as well as on-site. If it's easily accessible and quickly accessible, off-site storage would be fine. The issue is time. But if it's more secure and you think the supplies would be better stored there through the year, that might be a good place to think about.
This is Miriam, and I think that the question about does anybody know of grants for purchasing emergency supplies, I think that the unfortunate answer is that in terms of grants, i.e. an agency that provides funding for buying supplies, there are not a lot of those agencies or grant funding areas. I think that this is really a case where going to your community, going to Home Depot, going to Lowe's, and again, this is where having really articulated why specific objects in your collection are part of your community's memory, are part of the cultural fabric, that exercise that we did earlier today to help you do the 1-minute speech. That could very well be a 1-minute speech that you use with a local vendor, whether it's Lowe's or Home Depot or the vacuum cleaner store or the plastic sheeting supply company, where you can go and talk to them and really say, we know you sell supplies to a whole lot of corporations. Let us tell you why we are different and unique. And this is one place, I think, where honing your fundraising skills and your educating of others in your community skills becomes incredibly important. This is a place where sitting in your office and writing a grant is much less likely to yield results. It is a place where doing that community education is likely to yield you some really positive results.
Miriam, another good option is to build in prevention or protection, that pre-emergency protection, into collections improvement grants that you write, NEH, CAP grants, IMLS grants. For example, asking for cabinetry that has that's covered, or building in some way to cover your storage units. Sometimes you can get at it that way.
That's a great point too, and Francoise here in Tampa is going to add to that.
I just wanted to mention, I think it was the Tampa History Center who just had a great idea of starting a registry. It's almost like a baby shower, where online you could, they basically had a registry for their supplies that their members and donors could give the pencils and the Sharpies as part of their shower that they were organizing, and I think that was a big success.
That's a really good point. I am couple of you are shaking your heads in the room here. I remember reading about this. They basically organized the equivalent of a baby shower and made a long list of what it is that they were hoping for and the cost of each of those items. And then did a party just like we do showers, wedding showers and baby showers, and they actually got a lot of things on that list. And that, again, underscores the importance of communicating with individuals, because that's really where those gifts came from.
Okay. Yes, hi. This is Bert. Another way, I think, of getting supplies, although it's not, the grant way, is that if you can create a good collaboration between some of your professional organizations, like I believe there was a group formed between Society of American Archivists and maybe Society of Southwest Archivists after Katrina, and they were able to get together, and there was some process, I think, of donating supplies or working with some of the major vendors like Hollinger. And one thing here in Florida that we did, Society of Florida Archivists, is that one of our corporate members is Hollinger Metal Edge, and one of our SFA members is from Haiti, and just shortly after the earthquake there, we were able to work with Hollinger to make a big donation of supplies to Haiti, and some of the archives here in Florida sent shipments of supplies that they had down in Miami, where it was all gathered together and sent out to Haiti. So just some examples of collaborations that can help as well.
Tiffany, did you or your group have a question?
It wasn't a question, it was just Bert's comment. And then I also wanted to point out that Dean had commented in the chat about potentially talking to Home Depot or Lowe's and their foundations about potentially working through the national office and trickling down to the local store to get some supply donations.
So this is all some great examples of working together, and I suspect that one of the workings together might very well be that if you need supplies and you'd like them to buy them in bulk, reach out to some of the folks you've met through Connecting to Collections and see if a group of you can purchase and get a discount together. I'm going to also say, just as a reminder, that Gaylord is a corporate sponsor of the Florida Association of Museums. And for those of you who are members, this is a reason to be a member, for those of you who are members of the Florida Association of Museums, if you give there is a FAM code, and you get and I'm looking for somebody to remind me of the right percentage, but it's a 5 or 10% discount if you mention FAM when you were doing the purchase. It's a 10% discount if you mention FAM when you were doing your purchase. So if you're a member of FAM, remember to use that discount. It's a great reason. I'll just do my moment of plug for FAM. It's a great reason to join FAM if you are not. And that's with Gaylord. And Gaylord provides a lot of, it's not so much emergency supplies, but there are a lot of emergency supplies in their catalog, and you can make some pretty strong headway on your list that way.